So I am going to now turn it over to the main event. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Miss Erica Atwood, who is a dear friend of mine, like my big sister. And so I am going to turn it over to her to introduce herself and then, of course, introduce our fabulous panel. Thank you all so much.
Good evening, and thank you, Portia. This is a wonderful opportunity for all of us to get deeper acquainted with not only the mayor's priority of a cleaner, greener Philadelphia, but how do we engage in this issue directly as residents of Philadelphia, and what are the touch points that impact us directly, and what are the opportunities to get a deeper education in what sustainability truly means, and how can we get engaged in environmental justice. And so, one, to have an opportunity to allow our amazing panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into our conversation today. And I'm just going to follow the pictures on the slide, and so I will open it up to Zoraida to start us off and introduce yourself. Tell us kind of where you're from, what you're responsible for, and we'll keep it moving. Hmm, Where are my panelists? Zoraida, are you there? Or any of our panelists? There we go. All right. No problem.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm Zoraida Cordero, the current executive director for the Sustainable Business Network. I'm a macro social worker by trade, and I'm also a veteran. So thank you so much for having us here.
Thank you, Zoraida. Julie, I'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here tonight and hope everyone is staying warm. I'm Julie Hancher. I'm the executive director of Green Philly. We are a media company that covers sustainability and climate in the greater Philadelphia region and also host events that also engage people and talk about sustainability issues. So, super excited to talk about this topic tonight.
Awesome. P.O.C., you're up.
No doubt. Peace. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is P.O.C. I am the host, well, I'm wearing two Every Voice, Every Vote hats tonight. I'm the founder and host of Revive Radio plus Revive Media, but I'm also the host of Eco Word, which is found on WRD Word Radio.
Awesome. And Shari, are you here? We don't have Shari. Well, Councilmember Gauthier.
Good evening, everyone. Happy to be here. I'm Councilmember Jamie Gauthier. I'm very proud to represent the best part of the city, the third council district, which is West and Southwest Philadelphia. I can't believe it, but I just started my third year of my second term on city council. So I've been in council just over 6 years. I am an urban planner by trade. I focus mostly on creating and preserving affordable housing in the city and stopping displacement. I also chair council's environmental committee, and I used to be the executive director of SBN, so very happy to meet Zoraida.
Awesome. Thank you, Councilmember. And last but definitely not least, Shari, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Shari Hersh from Trash Academy, and we're an environmental justice and art grassroots organization. And we have a campaign called Clean Philadelphia Now to end illegal dumping by 2028. And it's a coalition, it's quite large. There's about 22 organizations that plan every other week all our actions and activities, and over 75 organizations have signed our platform, which was we actually created before Sherelle Parker became our mayor.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're going to jump right into our conversation. And my first question is for Zoraida and P.O.C. Even in our prep call, we talked a lot about blight. And when I say blight, I talk about litter, illegal dumping, potholes, kind of lack of green infrastructure in our communities. This is a top concern for city residents. This is something we hear a lot. The mayor talks about the removing the moniker of Philadelphia from kind of the language and from the vocabulary. And these are obvious and important concerns. We know that blight is attached to public safety and psychological safety and how you feel about your neighborhood. Can you talk about more deeply those impacts of blight on the physical space and the psychological space in our communities and in our neighborhoods? And
Absolutely.
Zoraida, you start us off and then toss it over to P.O.C. And then I
Sure.
have a follow-up on that too.
So when we think about public health and physical health and well-being of individuals, we often see them as silos, and we don't ever find the interconnection of how the environmental disparities are also connected to that. So unfortunately, when you're not assessing how an individual's community is directly affecting that individual's psyche and connection to their day-to-day, you're going to miss out on opportunities to create change. From the micro lens, if you're looking at the individual's mental health, physical health, when you think about the disparities of chemical exposure, when you think about the lessening of green space and blight and pollution, you're causing this individual on the micro level to be more hypervigilant and being under survival mode most of the time because they're not looking at greener space. And when you're looking at it from the meso and the macro area, when you think about how communities are essentially affected by this, if you are not creating green spaces and individuals in your community are feeling the same way as an individual on that micro level, you are now going to increase the lack of wanting to be a part of your community, the lack of feeling safe in your community, and then that increases the chances of violence and not being able to see the growth or economic mobility in the area. And a part of that also is influenced by how individuals feel seen or heard. So when there's lack of inconsistency in funding and there's lack of inconsistency in resources, the likelihood of community members and individuals building trust is very slim. So that continues to affect the individual on that micro level, which ultimately makes that meso impact that we're talking about.
Thank you.
And Zoraida, she hit it right on the head, honestly. I don't think I could say it any better, but I do want to throw out a couple phrases that I'm sure people have heard before. Crabs in a barrel, growing up in a concrete playground. If you don't know better, you can't do any better. And that tends to be the theme that goes along with a lot of these urban neighborhoods that we're talking about. And they were designed like that. This goes back decade to decade, back to redlining, where cities were completely keeping people out of green beautification projects and keeping people out of being in suburban neighborhoods so they can have clean air, and different things that they can deal with as far as when it comes down to water, food deserts, etc. So Zoraida hit it on the head. All these things are interconnected when it comes down to public health, public safety, infrastructure, transportation. All of these things go into itself, I should say, especially when we're having the conversation about environmental justice.
Yeah, so P.O.C. Kind of segues into kind of a part two of this question. So, yeah, like cleanliness and blight removal are really key and critical, but how can we use this as an entry point into that broader conversation around environmental justice? I got money on the mind. Environmental justice and sustainability. How is that an entry point? Because that's top of mind for everybody, but how do we do that deeper dive and broaden our knowledge base?
And I know this sounds very basic, but education is a huge start. Being able to teach people that this is not okay. Some people have been in this concrete playground for so long, they don't even understand that there's so many different walls out there that they can go to and touch and be able to be a part of, right? So I think that starting with education, putting that into our school systems, but also educating our supporters and our listeners who really want to be in a green space to understand that it can start right there in their home. It can start right there with them. Instead of throwing the trash out, shout out to Trash Academy. Instead of them throwing the trash out, we can actually find ways to compost our trash. These different types of steps to educating our communities.
Agree. I think I would like to add as well in the education piece is making the words that we're using to define sustainability acceptable, accessible, and adaptable. When I think about sustainability on the SBN lens of things, we're talking about the triple bottom lens approach, which is people, planet, and prosperity within that. That means that when we're thinking about environmental sustainability, creating green spaces and ensuring that people know about how to do this, whether it's climate resilience or it's about air pollution, when we're thinking about planting or we're thinking about GSI efforts, all of these things affect the succession of the community. But then when you think about sustainability of businesses, when you have funding for local businesses and you strengthen them, they have the opportunity to then create workforce, which is sustainable on that lens and being fluid about it. And lastly, when you think about sustainability as the community and prosperity, you're thinking about their well-being at large. And I believe that when we start working collaboratively as leaders in this space, when we're talking about businesses like Glitter, we're talking about Echo, we're talking about Mother Compost, and we're talking about local leaders and state leaders. If we're able to work together on the resources that we have, then we're able to give power and education to the community members where they can tell us what their issues are, and we have the tools to create those changes. But there seems to be a disconnect with that. And I believe that if we don't start working collaboratively and we start continue this silo approach, we're going to miss the mark and we ultimately will affect the planet.
Yeah, Erica, can I say one thing before we move on? I'm gonna be really quick. Another thing that I would just like to add too is what Zoraida just said about conversation, like how we approach the conversation, and making sure that when we approach the conversation, the communities that we're talking about are a part of the conversation. We're not just talking to them, but talking with them about things that they need solutions about. And another thing too, when we talk about conversation, right, you can go into a space like Southwest, which is a food desert, and we'll have the conversation like, this is food injustice. They're like, yeah, but I don't have food at my table. I'm like, that is food injustice, like having that conversation, meeting them where they are so they can actually understand the sustainable words that we're using when we're talking about how we're here to help their communities.
Yeah, thank you for introducing that, P.O.C. I wanna come back to that a little bit later, around kind of policy communication, and engagement. So our next question, and so the Parker administration launched the Clean and Green Initiative with a focus on block by block impact in making sure we have trash pickup twice a week, the street sweeping, tree planting, the creation of the Office of Clean and Green Initiatives. Julie, from your perspective, based on kind of what the administration has set out to do and kind of the policies and practices that they've stated and implemented, what do you think the progress has been made so far? Where do you think we are in this?
Great question. And I love how you teed up this section, especially talking about Philadelphia, because I think that has been a moniker for the city for years. And definitely the twice a weekly trash pickup has been one of the most visible pieces that the administration has done so far. I know this came to like the Fishtown, North, and I believe North, I'm not sure exactly where the limits are, in Philadelphia, which definitely people are talking about and communicating with neighbors. I think some people are even making like charts to be very transparent for what day the new trash day is. So I think with that, some people love it. Some people are a little neutral. And I think also there's also a, with that specifically, they're not including the recycling of the second day, which I think also is a missing gap there. I'd say also their progress, Mayor Dun or Mayor Nutter, I apologize. When we started our work, we were talking with Mayor Nutter. Mayor Parker, the Mayor Parker administration also has discussed adding in the citywide cleanup, which I think people were surprised that they went outside and their streets were actually clean from that. So it was a block by block initiative. I know they did it at least once. I think they were talking about doing the second. I'm not sure what the progress was. I know the first one was very transparent with like maps and showing where the cleanups were block by block. And I think though, although we're seeing a lot of this progress, and also also as I add a third one before I move on to that quick piece of the segue of the tree plantings, I think is another thing that was mentioned heavily in both the EV study as well as just with residents in general. Because people who are advocates that understand the importance of trees, the difference in temperature, how they can beautify blocks, they can also improve moods and just really help the temperatures in the same day in Philadelphia. If there is a tree-lined block versus a block that has no trees, there can be as much as a 20 or 22-degree difference in temperature on the same exact day in the same city. So trees aren't just like a pretty asset, right? They can really impact our livelihoods, help us cool. So I think also continuing the tree plan and trying to have that be a hallmark is super important and visible mark of the city. However, there's also a lot of trees that come down, which I think is another piece, which is an interesting, I feel like it's tricky because with all the progress, there's always hurdles, which I think is the ongoing theme of Philadelphia. So I'll just stop there because I know there's a lot more to talk about, but there's just a lot in this topic in general.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Shari, like I would love to hear your perspective, particularly around kind of the illegal dumping. How do you think we're doing and how have we progressed thus far? You're on mute.
Thank you for asking. Um, I think for us, the most important thing is the city pivoted from talking about cleaning, cleaning, cleaning to talking about ending illegal dumping. And certainly the sanitation strike made everyone see what people in many neighborhoods see every day, day in and day out. And we specifically focus on legacy dump sites. And those are sites that resist cleaning. The neighbors clean them, community groups clean them. They're dumped on again over and over and over for years and years and years. Ninth in Ontario, 20 years. Sixth in Somerset, 12 years. Like all over the city, we have this. So that pivot to actually talking about illegal dumping, to introducing enforcement. They have really expanded enforcement with the 40 people illegal dumping task force. Impounding cars. That was actually Councilperson Squilla who did that, who put that into place. I think these are significant moves in the right direction. And I just want to say again, cleaning doesn't end dumping. It doesn't, it's a systems issue. And what I'm seeing is the city move from this obsessive cleaning, which is very expensive and it's not enduring. It's not going to be here when a different mayor comes in and switches their focus. Just like street got rid of bulk pickup, and we're still suffering from that. Because bulk pickup by appointment is good, but bulk pickup on a schedule is a best practice.
Sorry, for those who
Curbside.
don't know, tell us what bulk pickup is or was.
That's like your refrigerator, they
Thank you.
used to call it whites because they were all white back in the day. I think your your dryer, your sofa, it's your big things that there's a lot of seniors in Philly, there's a lot of people without vehicles. So bulk pickup is really important for preventing dumping.
Awesome. Thank you. So, Councilmember Gauthier, you have a longstanding kind of career and history in your education in urban planning, your experience with workforce, and your positions in holding and working towards sustainability and environment. And now, given your role in city council, continuing to be a staunch advocate for sustainability, can you talk to us a little bit about what the challenges have been to implement these policies and these practices from your perspective, kind of on the inside of legislation and policymaking?
Sure thing. At this moment, I think what residents are seeing are initiatives that are very much in process. I inferred from the survey that, some residents did recognize some of the increased cleanup efforts, but some folks are saying that they're not really seeing it, and they want to see more. I think Philadelphians are generally right on the money about things that are happening. They kind of tell it like it is. And I think what you saw in the survey is exactly what exists, that these are fairly new initiatives that are still in progress. Some of them are pilots, some of them are citywide. So from my perspective, some of this is a timing issue. Certainly, we're two budgets into the Parker administration. So we funded, Mayor Parker's agenda in the FY25 budget. We're currently halfway through the FY26 budget. And during both of those budgets, we've put millions of dollars, $853 million over the 5-year plan to expand clean and green initiatives. And in fact, in Mayor Parker's first year, we sort of advanced her money before the budget process even started. We advanced around $200 million. I would say roughly half of that was for her to get new clean and green initiatives off of the ground quickly and faster than the budget would be completed. And then about the other half went towards the Riverview facility and rehab. And so certainly these initiatives have been well funded by the city council. We've talked about a lot of them. The twice weekly trash collection, which at this point just started in North Philly, but I believe has been going in Center City and South Philly for several months. We put a lot of money towards street paving. And I've been seeing a lot of that happening like all at the same time. My constituents started calling it the Great Repaving because so many of our streets in West Philadelphia were we're getting paved at the same time. So we know that that is in fact happening. We put money towards other things, year-round cleaning of vacant lots. We helped the administration to start a new initiative planting trees on commercial corridors. Council has always been very supportive of the tree plan. So these things have received, have been well funded by the city council. We believe in these initiatives. I think what we're seeing is like growing pains and some things really getting off the ground. Another thing that I've seen for myself, so every council district now has its own cleaning crew. Those crews, I know Shari says we got to do other things besides cleaning. I agree. But I just wanted to say, I know those crews exist. I went out with the 3rd district crew. They clean every district entirely, I think every 13 weeks. And so I want to commend, these initiatives aren't perfect. They're not, completely mature yet. They're not even all citywide, but I think it's notable that the mayor has held this up as a key part of her platform. Prior to Mayor Parker becoming the mayor, I was advocating for increased attention to quality of life issues, especially in Black and brown neighborhoods, because what we found is that there's a very real disparity on the service you get from the city based on the neighborhood that you live in. And so I fought for multiple budget years to get, millions more dollars under Kenny towards these type of services. But with Mayor Parker, it hasn't really been a fight. She, this is a part of what she's putting forward for the city. So the challenges, I think, are just that they're new. And beyond that, I would agree with Shari and some of the other folks that I'd like to see us focus on the green part a little bit more and to also think about, expanding recycling, getting to zero waste. There are more things that we can do. Oh, one other point of pride that I'd like to lift up. The streetlight improvement project has been amazing for the city. It's been equitable. We essentially, and this was before Parker's tenure, this was under Kenny, but we essentially replaced upwards of 200,000 streetlights in the city of Philadelphia and turned them all to LED, which helps the environment, but also helps with public safety. And we started those streetlight improvements in the areas that we're seeing the most gun violence and the most crashes, and those tend to be Black and brown neighborhoods. So a very equitable project as well as one that's good for the environment. So in progress.
Yeah, and so I wanna ask a follow-up question around kind of the levels of government. So we have kind of what's at the city level, what's at the state level, and then at the federal level. What do you believe is uniquely challenging in this political era to sustainability that we need to pay attention to or we need to be louder about? I think that was the nicest way I could tap to answer that question.
I mean, the federal government is not a reliable partner anymore. They're not a reliable partner on many of the things that we've depended on them for, and you don't know from one day to the next what is funded and what is not. I was doing a hearing on the tree plan and, we heard from the administration that they were not able to access their funding for the tree plan, a $12 million grant. suddenly, a couple days later, they were able to access it. But you never know. You never know when you wake up what the
Whack-a-mole.
president has defined as some type of radical liberal agenda, right? That never used to mean trees, but now it does. And so the challenge is that we cannot count on them for support. I'll give you another um, example. They tried, I believe they blocked a grant that we were using to correct the wrongs of the past with a public housing development, like opening up the street network. We had received a grant from the federal government. And that was blocked because that's part of some radical DEI agenda. So the federal government is not a reliable partner. So therefore, we're going to have to look towards philanthropic partners. We're going to have to be able to depend on the state in a way that, frankly, we haven't been able to before. I lift up the whole SEPTA debacle as an example. And we're going to have to depend on ourselves. We're going to have to fund ourselves to do the things that are important to us and our residents.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Can I add
So,
to that or?
yeah,
I was
go
gonna
ahead,
say I want
Shari.
to add to it.
But I
Because
got something for you. I got something for you that's a follow-up, P.O.C. So I got
Okay.
you. I got you.
Okay.
if I could follow behind everything Councilmember has stated, I 1000% agree. But also, when you think about the inconsistency, this lack of inconsistency of funding, whether it's federal or local, it's causing organizations to pay the ultimate price. For example, SBN was a part of that before I was brought in. They lost funding, which means they lost staff, which means these programs related to sustainability got halted. So if you just multiply that across a sector of many agencies that got funding caught during the beginning of this administration and are still fighting for that funding specifically related to green spaces, we're looking at a pause. Even though there is progress happening, there is a pause, and I feel that there's an opportunity. I think sometimes we get really caught up in the fact that we don't have access to things because of how we're DEI is being seen, but I believe if we work strategically together, we might be able to create impact. And I'm wondering if that is the way to create progress, because the reality is they want us to feel stopped. They want us to feel stuck. And the people who are being affected, the way I see this is their real lives at the end of these decisions and in this impact. So I'm wondering what progress looks like when we come together to not be halted or discouraged because of federal cuts and inconsistency.
Yeah, thank you for that, Zoraida. And POC, just a follow up. Councilmember mentioned that she really would like there to be more focus on green initiatives, and even the every vote, every voice data shows us that cleaning, the priorities are in reducing litter, adding trash cans, and they rank kind of higher than longer term green investments. Talk to us about how we can balance that. You mentioned education earlier, but what are some other things that like really we need to focus on to make sure folks understand it's just as important to plant a tree as it is to plant a trash can,
That's a great
if not more
question.
so.
No, that's a great question. Shout out to conservation voters of PA. Those are my homies over there, right? We do a lot together on Eco. We're trying to debunk misinformation and press forward on information that needs to be said and needs to be told to the public, especially voters in the state of Pennsylvania. So we just recently had a crazy election in 2000. I'm gonna give you an example. We recently just had a crazy election in 2025 where the state of Pennsylvania was trying to retain three judges, right? We had three judges on retention, and all three of those judges had their hand in the pot of Reggie, right? They were voting for Reggie. Reggie is a bill that we wanted to be implemented into the state of Pennsylvania that would actually help reduce a carbon emission, right? Against especially in the West when it comes down to the different industries. I'm trying to make this example smaller. I'm sorry. But yeah, so with them, we talked a little bit about how voting is extremely important. What I'm trying to get at, my point I'm trying to get at is how voting is extremely important and how big money right now, billionaires, such as like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, they're really pushing out misinformation to a lot of states who have a lot of open land where they're trying to buy up land for these data centers, right? And they're pushing their money onto their legislators to be able to vote against these things when it comes down to green spaces. So we talk a little bit about that, or a lot about that, on ECO, where Conservation Voters of PA, of how we need to make sure that we are having the conversation around civic engagement. What does that look like for people who are in green spaces in the green industry when it comes down to civic engagement as well?
Thank you. And Julie, just a follow-up question on that. What happens if we don't make these long-term investments? What, if not, then what?
That's a great question. I think it's interesting that you mentioned something like investing in trash cans would be a short-term solution, or I think that's maybe how some people are picturing it. But I think one of the biggest complaints is that there aren't trash cans in Philly. And I think a great example or showing of that is we actually partnered on an op-ed or we published an op-ed by Charles Hegler, aka a Faith Trash Man. And that post, which we talked about, just how Philly needs more trash cans, got over 24 or 26,000 views, had thousands of comments because people see that I think a lot of initiatives that seem like they're long-term investments, like putting some of this money into a trash can, which sounds not innovative, just a simple solution. But I know, for example, like Walt Disney World, they were like, let's put them every 30 feet because that's how long someone will carry their trash. I think another really good example of that is there was a pilot done, I think this is about 10-ish years for the city. Maybe Jamie can correct me, but they wanted to put lids on recycling bins. So I'm sure in Philadelphia, a lot of people recognize after Trash and Recycling Day, you walked on the block and your recycling and trash is, or your neighbor's trash is on the street. I picked it up for like an hour on Saturday before the snow really hit. Because I noticed it's like spread all of my neighbors all over and everything. So I think there definitely are ways you can do both. And I think the one thing that we've noted, and I think Mayor Parker hasn't said as strongly, even though I do think, for example, the tree plan and LED lights, Jamie mentioned, for example, just now, those are long-term investments that also help climate. But I think climate change is often, and especially now with this administration, is left out of those conversations and not that direct line between how that affects our lives. And that can go into everything. Right now, we're meeting virtually because of this ginormous snowstorm. That's actually those climate change. There's likely an impact that like the Arctic air because of jet streams is actually impacting this weather we have and the snow that will last for days. So I think especially when there are leaders in the city government that can draw the climate conversation to like everyday conversations, residents will then be like, oh, that's actually something that is important for the future, but it also helps quality of life. It helps their safety. It's such an interconnected issue and it shouldn't be this foreign piece there as well. So just think that's another point to think about of just, how do we talk about climate change more? How can city leadership and people in government talk about that to neighbors and just make that approachable versus something that sounds foreign. Data centers, all of these pieces in the conversations that we're having tonight and often.
Thank you. Thank you. So I introduced kind of the notion of psychological safety in our conversation. And so we think about psychological safety, we think about what are the non-tangible parts of cleaning green neighborhoods, sustainability, economic justice, like is what you can see and then what then happens. And one of those things we talk about is kind of behavior change. We think about what it looks like to engage with community leadership, agency, advocacy, responsibility, all of those nuances. P.O.C, can you talk to me about who's doing it well? In kind of the leading in the education and behavioral change space as it relates to sustainability. And then I've got a follow-up question that really dives into an issue of race and class, and I'm going to open it up to a couple other people. So start with kind of who's doing it well, and then we're going to dive into responsibility, race and class.
For me, I'm always going to start with the OGs. Shout out to the Black captains. I think the Black captains are doing it well. They're holding it down in many ways. Shout out to the Office of Clean and Green Initiatives. Carlton Williams, they actually put money into block captains this year or last year in 2025, giving them money to actually beautify their blocks, giving them incentives as far as like brooms, dustpans, trash bags, all of these things to actually help, unionize and really get people out to the space of unity within blocks. So I'm always going to champion the block captains. I talk about this a lot, but as far as organizations, shout out to Trash Academy. I see Tina Tynes is in the audience right now. She's been doing the work for some time now. She shows up at city council meetings when it's time to yell and scream and hold up a picket sign. So, the organizations, boots on the ground that are doing the work, I think that our grassroots are also things. Shout out to Germantown CDC with I Love Thy Hood. They're doing some amazing work over there in the Germantown section. Shout out to the farm in West Philadelphia. They're doing some amazing work as well. I can't think of the name off the top of my
Peace
head.
Park or the
Peace Park,
one,
yes, Peace
yeah.
Park, yes, they're doing some amazing work as well. So there's some amazing grassroots organizations that are doing some amazing work, and then there's some individuals. Shout out to Judith Robinson. She's holding down the block when it comes down to a community garden in North Philadelphia. So I think that there's individuals, and then there's also organizations, but then there's also people who are in line with the city, like block captains, that are really doing some amazing work to really beautify the city at the same time. And one thing that I wanted to just go backwards a little bit as far as how the city is cleaning and not necessarily focusing on greening. I think that because we're so far behind in the spaces where we have other cities around us who are really pushing that green initiative, we're so far behind that we feel like we need to start with the cleaning, because we do have so much tourism that comes into our city yearly, especially like a year 2050. I mean, the year of 2026, which is the 250. So even the conversation around the Clean and Green Office partnering with Mural Arts to beautify the highways and add green spaces along the highways, I think that is just a step behind, but also it's something that is going to be sustainable. But I think what Julie mentioned as far as going into, oh, I'm sorry, the Trash Academy mentioned, Shari, she mentioned, going into that next administration, are they actually going to hold on to that space? Is that still something that's going to be important to them?
Thank you for that. And I honestly, I can speak to Julie. When you mentioned the Nutter administration, I almost started twitching over here because I worked in the Nutter administration, the Kenney administration, and early on in the Parker administration. So I've seen the gamut of initiatives as it relates to cleaning, greening, sustainability, all of it. So want to kind of pivot that this question just a little bit and open it up. And Zoraida, I'm gonna look to you because I saw you nodding your head. When we talk about, well, not we, because we get it, but when I mention sustainability to maybe my family or to other folks that may not be as educated specifically on environmental justice and sustainability, there's not a notion that it is inclusive of poor folks, black folk, brown folk. It is these other people's issue, and that's nice to have, but there's a disconnect between the impact of climate change in communities and who it impacts versus who should be working on it and how should we talk about it. Can you talk a little bit about that disconnect and what are some things that have been done to build bridges?
That's a wonderful question, and it's also loaded. I believe you could look at it from the lens of how people have been educated on sustainability and access to education on sustainability public schools and having to go to academia to obtain that knowledge. And if we're not being intentional about defining sustainability and educating communities, we're dropping the ball there. When you're thinking about the interconnection of sustainability and how fluid it is, the reality is people that are involved in the sustainable space are people who have more access to resource and more privileged, which means that they're probably live in suburban communities that have greener spaces, more businesses that are supporting impact. And when you look on the other end of things, when you think about racial inequality, environmental injustices, and you talk about vulnerable communities, their neighborhoods do not match suburban neighborhoods, including rural areas. And I feel like that's the disconnect is the people who are the most privileged in their neighborhoods do not realize that when we are not being intentional about creating inclusive spaces for sustainability, we're also pushing out the communities that we're looking to actually create impact for. We're not inviting them to the room. We're actually making them feel like they don't belong, and they're the ones who are actually being more affected by environmental injustices. So I believe that the opportunity to do work there is to check in on our privilege and our access to information and to call ourselves out and work collaboratively when we're inviting in those who are most exhausted, because the reality is communities that are disproportionately being impacted are exhausted. They're exhausted of the pauses. They're exhausted of federal cuts. They're exhausted of seeing inconsistency. When you lose funding in organizations, they're going to meet another director, another representative. And for them, it feels as if they're being neglected time and time again. And I feel that there's a responsibility for us to advocate for that consistency, but also bring them into the room so that they can share why they're tired, why they're exhausted, but also what they want to see and how they want to see it happen and what our job and responsibility is to that.
Right. Thank.
Erica, can I make one comment about the
Yep,
disconnect?
because I was about to open it up to anybody else who wanted to comment on it. Go in.
I just want to make one really quick comment and shout out to Councilmember Gauthier, right? Because she introduced this bill into City Council, which is Stop Trashing Our Air Act. And I think that's the biggest disconnect that we have as an example right here in the city of Philadelphia. We want to beautify our city, clean and green our city, but we want to trash the city of Chester like they're not our sister city. That is a huge disconnect when we talk about environmental justice and we talk about different environments as far as class and when it comes down to status, being able to say, Philadelphia deserves a better, cleaner, beautiful city, but then we go and we put our stuff in Chester. So I just think that's a huge disconnect that's happening right here in our own city.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who grew up in Camden, who saw the trash steam plant build, who like, and now, as I say, Jersey grown, Philly sewn. It is. I get the connection, in ways that other people don't. Councilmember Gauthier.
Well, first, thank you, P.O.C., for bringing that up. And there are so many people on the panel and in the room who are helping with that effort. So
Yeah,
thank you, thank you, thank you.
no doubt.
But we ran into an obstacle that we have to figure out with this bill. And I'll say Chester is the worst case of environmental racism I have ever seen.
Mhm.
And not only does it host the largest trash incinerator in the entire country, taking trash from places as far as Puerto Rico, New York, and Philly, it's surrounded by a host of other dirty uses that makes the residents unable to use their own waterfront. It's disgusting. But the thing that I ran into is a challenge that we often face with environmental issues. And this is when the environment somehow seems to clash with labor. And so I held that bill the other day because union folks were saying if the city ends the contract at the Chester incinerator, we're going to lose our jobs. And, the majority of these people don't live in Chester at all. But that made it almost at least on that day, it made it a hard hurdle to get a majority of votes. But it sometimes can be very hard to make the argument around people's health and welfare that you can't directly see, right? And to make that present for folks, particularly when it bumps up against economics. So definitely something that we have to figure out. But we're not giving up. We just held the bill.
Thanks, Councilmember Shari.
Yeah, thanks. So I think there's something we do that is really powerful. And I would also shift the language from sustainability to environmental justice because, frankly, there's a widespread care and action. There's not a passive thing. I believe it might be a perception. I'm not sure how true it is. But the thing we do is we take the redlining map and we overlay the litter index. And it's astonishing because you're looking at 75 years of disinvestment. You're seeing the accumulated burdens. You can put the asthma map, the crime map, the heat index. You can put it all right on top, and it's that same redlined area. And when you do that, we do that in all our teach-ins and all. It's like a aha moment. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that we use the story of Coca-Cola. Basically, Keep America Beautiful was created by the corporations that were switching from reusables
Yeah.
to plastic, and they shifted the blame onto us. So the consumer, it's our behavior that needs to change. So when communities talk about behavior, they are watching their neighbor come out and put the bag on the telephone pole, up and down Burke Street, up and down this street and that street, all over the city. It just collects all week long because people don't want that trash in their house. They don't want bugs. They don't want rats. They don't want, and so it's not legal. That's residential dumping. Well, that's behavior, but what caused that behavior? The density of the housing, how whether or not there's garbage disposals, whether or not there's access to storage. That was an L&I issue, which I think the illegal task force can begin to take on. But I'm very wary of these assumptions about behavior and the pressure about behavior, and moving the conversation to the fact that we make two-thirds more trash per person than we did in the 60s. And it's a global problem.
Yeah.
Packaging is coming from the fossil fuel industry, and they're actually planning to more than double the plastics by 2050 and enter the African market and the Latin American market to make up for clean energy. There's a lot of money behind this. And then it all turns into our behavior and how we're relating to each other. And we have to flip that script and go. This is again why I keep pushing for systems change, and why Trash Academy, why the coalition does, was we all want it at the block level, but we get that it happens at a bigger level behind that then normalizes clean. So the cleaning is good. Not, I know you guys I think the cleaning is bad, but I'm just saying the behavior and the environmental justice, we just gotta, give people the information so they stop blaming each other.
Thank you for that, Shari. So, Councilmember, I want to follow up on something you just talked about, the unfortunate situation with Chester and the lack of movement on the environmental justice for the region at this point. What are things that we can do as folks that live in Philadelphia, who care about our city, care about our families and our communities, do to help you and help electeds like you move the needle forward, and then hold those accountable that may not be taking everything into perspective?
Yeah. So advocacy, advocacy, advocacy. I was really thankful to be supported by a wonderful coalition on the Stop Trashing Our Air Act. And, we faced an obstacle the other day, but it's not over. So I'll be sitting down with that coalition to think about like how we come at it. But the fact that there is a coalition is very important, that there are advocates and citizens and residents that are willing to do lobby days, that are willing to come to hearings, that are willing to testify. We had so many people from Chester directly in chambers the other day talking about how the incinerator and the pollution there has affected their everyday lives. That is so important. And we have to keep that up, especially on environmental justice issues, because typically the folks who are experiencing the injustice are the folks who are left out of the conversation, who have not been invited to the table, and who have been oppressed. So it's important that they're in the room, right? The other thing I would say is use all the channels that we know exist, even though sometimes they can be a little bit annoying. So for sure, call 311 often. Even if you call your council member, after you call 311, it's good to register these complaints. I talked earlier about the advocacy I did around Just Services PHL and like pushing Mayor Kenny more on quality of life services. The reason why I was able to see the disparity in neighborhoods for city services is because of people calling 311. Do that. Even if you call my office after that and have us follow up on the call. Reach out to your neighborhood action centers. I think it's cool that Mayor Parker has set up these 10 neighborhood action centers to be her eyes and ears in the community. And, City Council is always willing to take constituent services concerns. That's a big part of our jobs. But the administration, they're the implementers. It's very important for Mayor Parker and her team to hear about citizens' concerns directly. Reach out to those neighborhood action centers. And we're on the cusp of budget season. The budget is the document that shows what we care about. And what we care about is directly related to what we fund. So reach out to your council members, tell them the things that you want to see, have more funding and more support. Watch these budget hearings to the extent that you can. And then we also have like public comment sessions during budget. And that's a key time for citizens to participate.
Awesome, thank you. And then one last question before we roll into Q&A. And Julie, this is for you. So, just to put a pin in public understanding, um, how can our local media better tell clean and green stories that reflect what's really happening in neighborhoods, both the good and the bad?
Of course. I think P.O.C. actually put this perfectly earlier when she mentioned, it's really meeting people where they are and starting with those stories. So I think the great thing with Philadelphia, and especially exemplified by the Every Voice, Every Vote project, as well as Philly Journalism Collaborative, there's so many great local and small outlets that are also filling a lot of the gaps of traditional outlets. So I know, P.O.C. does a lot of great work interviewing a lot of these people. She had mentioned, I was going to say, the all-star list of everyone from Judith Robinson, one of our Sustained PHL award recipients from like 2017. The lineup there, there's Planet Philadelphia, who also does like a small radio podcast as well. I think Green Philly, we're trying to just tell all the stories. We interviewed everyone from the wonderful council member, Jamie Gauthier, to local neighborhood, captains and people that are making differences on social media and just really thinking outside the traditional storytelling. But I think it's important, especially in the age of social media and how people get information, to be focusing on smaller outlets and people that are, going in, getting to know their communities and amplifying. So I know for us, we do a lot of pop-up newsrooms, really audience listenings and engaging. And I think, that's just, once again, the people doing the work, P.O.C., Green Philly, we partner with The Citizen, Billy Penn, all these other outlets are really just continuing to tell and amplify a lot of those neighborhood stories.
Awesome, thank you. So now we're going to shift into audience Q&A. I know there's a few questions that are in here. Jared, do you want to kind of read them off for us?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Can everybody see and hear me?
Yeah.
I don't see my video on there, so okay, as long as you can. Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Jared Council. I am the editorial lead and program manager at Every Voice, Every Vote. And I am going to be sharing the questions. These are, I'm just going to leave them open, so whoever wants to chime in, go ahead. Our first question comes from Adam Nolan. He says he's essentially asking about this idea of green gentrification and this idea of new tree planting sort of improving an area, which then can increase property values, which then leads to displacement. And he is wondering if anyone here, he also pointed to a Temple study that showed some of this. And he's wondering if anybody here has any thoughts on that or insights there.
I can give a brief answer and allow other folks to weigh in. Well, one, people need to be around trees, right? And the areas of the city that have the least trees tend to be the poorest areas and areas with Black and brown folks. So I don't think that we can let the idea of green gentrification deter us from doing what we need to do. But I also think we can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? We can invest in neighbors in ways that keep them in their homes while also carrying out improvements that make their neighborhoods better. I wanted to give an example of the 11th Street Bridge project in DC. I was able to go and visit the team out there that's working on, this wonderful new green space in one of DC's last Black neighborhoods. And they're so focused on the equity piece that they're going to build this huge, wonderful green space, but they're going to invest in the housing first, right? To make sure that residents can get repairs. They're going to invest in job training first. They're going to invest in all the things that fight against displacement, as they roll out the project, and in some cases before they roll out the project. So I think, Black neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods, we need access to green just like anybody else, but you could do more than one thing at the same time. And if there's a concern around displacement, then we just invest in ways, I think, that cut down on displacement while we're greening our neighborhoods and making them more sustainable.
I think the council member just said, obviously that was a great point. I think in addition, there's just, and Zoraida also brought this up earlier with the federal funding cuts. I think people frequently put like it's an either or situation, but especially when there's cuts to things like, the solar programs and renewable energy, which we are now seeing is increasing PICO bills across the state, especially in Philadelphia. That's actually we had, I think, 80,000 views on a reel last year talking about why PICO bills are so high, which are continuing to escalate. Water department bills are increasing. The LIHEAP program, I was going to say I'm not 100% sure someone else in this room probably knows, but even just keeping residents in their homes is something that is important as well. So it's just, people tend to fixate on like one aspect of sustainability, but all these issues are so interrelated that, people can't pay their heating bills, feed themselves, feed their pets. It's just such a uh, interrelated issue. And I hope we can have more collective, cohesive conversations versus just thinking of that as a one piece of the puzzle.
And
Can
I
I?
wanted to jump. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to add quickly when we're talking about the gentrification of green spaces, I want to be mindful that I agree with council member in the fact that it's twofold. We have to be mindful of the historic way that these lands were made, how groundwater systems were implemented, and how outdated and how hazardous these items are. So we're doing a dance right now, finding the most environmental friendly but also safest way to do this. So there is going to be disruption, but the little bit of disruption that is happening for the most positive outcome for quality of life is trying to figure out what that trade-off is. And I think being supportive, but also being mindful of sustaining it. We have to educate our community members and allow them to be empowered to figure out how to keep these spaces green. We're doing all these innovations and ideas, but we're not really sure of how people are going to be able to sustain it themselves. And I think that's probably some work that we can do, and I think it would create the balance between creating green spaces equitably.
I wanted to jump in, and I think that was a really great question and a great point. Glad that you actually brought that up. And I don't necessarily want to be a thorn, but I think it needs to be said. And yes, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, but it's like who's being affected by these particular, developments or gentrification that we're talking about. And the first thing that I thought about when you said green gentrification, I thought about money, right? Because money is green and money talks and money walks. And that's exactly what's happening in a lot of these urban neighborhoods, especially in our city of Philadelphia, right? Where we see development happening directly in impoverished neighborhoods, development happening directly in neighborhoods that are no longer affordable for people who have been long-term residents in the city of Philadelphia. So when we think about green gentrification and we're implementing these green spaces like dog parks or, community gardens and things like that, who are actually the ones that's benefiting from it? Because when we put these things into these neighborhoods, the people who were once a part of these neighborhoods are no longer there to benefit from them. So I think that we do have to point out the obvious, right? This placement is happening all around the city of Philadelphia because of gentrification, because of development, and the developers have the money to do what they think is okay for the community that they're choosing to develop in, right? And when it comes down to the community at itself at large, we are 20, 30, years behind, because when it comes down to decisions that are being made in our community, the decisions have already been made, the development is already happening, and then when it's time for us to talk about it, it's already being done and it's too late. So I think that green gentrification is, an idea that we should think about on the long term.
There is another piece to it too, which I think might be worth mentioning. Is it actually one of the most positive things in Philly is actually when a community takes over its own vacant lots and develops them. And Empowered CDC did that. It's Clean Kensington is doing that. Esperanza is like all over it. Like, so when communities get hold of them, and it's hard. Everyone talks about the challenges, and I know the Office of Clean and Green is working on that. They're going to roll out a thing around lot taking, like communities being able to take over their lots a little more easily. It's a huge thing, and it's actually a pretty big it's a different model than what P.O.C is talking about. That's 100% true. And that is also goes back to redlining, where the values were so depressed and developers have been sitting on that land for a long time and then they displace all the renters, right? So and that's a problem with our tax structure and all that. So that's very real, very real. But there's this other thing going on in Philadelphia that's hugely resilient and hugely successful, which is communities greening their own spaces. And that's part of what people want to see out of the Clean and Green Initiative is there that they can do it themselves, that there's enough structures in place from the city, whether it's funding or permissions, that they can make a move on these blighted, dumping attractors.
Can I jump in on this quickly? Because I love
Yeah.
that this was brought up, and I had a similar thought when POC was talking. Um, we do not have to wait on developers to bring the new dog park or like whatever. There are so many community greening efforts, community farming efforts. They just don't get the support, unfortunately, from government that they need to, but we can turn that around. And, Shari was talking earlier about system change. This is a perfect area where we need to think about what system change really looks like, because a lot of the issue is that it's hard for community members to gain control of these parcels from the land bank and put them into some kind of permanent ownership that protects them from development. That's a city system issue,
Mhm.
but it's one that we can address. Councilmember Kendra Brooks has done a lot of work
Yes.
trying to buy back all the parcels of land that a long time ago we sold to a company called US Bank. She's been trying to have the city buy those liens off of that land so that we can return them to community members who are gardening on them. And then for my part, I think I've delivered 5 urban gardens in my district to permanent ownership with the Neighborhood Gardens Trust in
Mhm.
the past year or so. But it's painstaking work. And oftentimes I find myself having to fight against my own city partners to justify why I would take this piece of land and put it into permanent community ownership for a garden or an open space. So that's a problem we can fix.
I think
Uh,
the question to pose on that is just to make sure when we're doing this, we're asking, what are we doing for our current community and the community members that are here versus are we doing this for community mem people that we're looking to invite in? And I think when we lead in that matter, it allows us to be intentional. Just to add to the parcels really quickly, a lot of times, a lot of community members are unaware that the parcels that are available are environmental Superfund sites. And ensuring that these sites are hazard free is also important. And that is also a part of why it's hard for people to access these parcels. And I think education on that and informing people, do your research and understand Superfund sites, please do. You will understand about the toxins and how hazardous certain spaces within your neighborhoods are.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks everyone for weighing in on that. We do have one other this looks like a comment and it's related to this idea around helping spread information to different communities and getting sort of buy-in about clean and green efforts and sustainability. And I'm actually just going to read it so I don't so the person gets their idea across. This is from Chrissy. She says, "What if Philly streets reflect their homes as a product of a trifling home, then a foster kid turned foster parent and CASA volunteer? I strongly believe a partnership with organizations tied to both children and families would assist in long-term goals." Any thoughts?
I agree. Just quickly, I've been a part of a lot of grassroots organizations that did cleanups block by block. And I've seen firsthand how community members use those tools once you leave it with them to continue to create clean and maintain their spaces. But how can we afford this? How can we sustain this? And how do we duplicate it is the question. I do believe that when you involve local organizations that aren't just focused on clean spaces, if you work collaboratively, you have the opportunity to create impact and give ownership back to neighborhoods.
Shout out to Chrissy. Thank you for asking that question. Chrissy is actually the founder of Philly Experiences, and she does different city tours around the city of Philadelphia. So if you're ever looking for a tour, looking to, break down a corridor, Chrissy's definitely the one to do that. But to answer her question, I wanted to just say, Chrissy, that's one of the things that we do on EcoWord, and I pride myself, in as far as making sure that people understand you don't have to be a product of your environment. Yes, that might be part of your story, but that doesn't have to be the thing that ends your story. That doesn't have to be the thing that highlights that we have to highlight when it comes down to your story. So when it comes down to being the change that you want to see, we can teach that and install that into the next generation of being the change that they want to see, being the actionable step to the change that they want to see. And another thing, when Erica asked the question to Julie about how we can tell stories, right? Yes, meeting the people where they are, but then also making sure that we're telling the stories that are solution based, also making sure we're telling the stories that are action items, also telling the stories of people who had to go triumph to go over the hill, to go over the mountain in order to get to the successful point. Not just always highlighting the success of how they got to, planting 100 trees. But what did they have to do? How many council members did they have to call? How much, in the background as far as pitching different ideas and filling out grant applications did they have to do? Those are the type of stories that we also have to tell, because a lot of people right now, because of social media, only see the success. But when it comes down to the green industry, it's very hard to get success easily. You know what I mean? So when it comes down to the industry that we're talking about, making sure that we're highlighting the stories and the people who are working every day. And I want to just go back to shout out one more person individually, Ms. Zuline Mayfield, who is one of the co-founders of Circle, which is a nonprofit organization in the city of Chester, who's pushing every day for environmental justice, telling that story, what she has been doing over the past decade to make sure that there's been a voice in Chester who's not quitting, who's not giving up on residents, and who's not giving up on the city in its entirety.
I wanted to weigh in here quickly too. I think education will go a long way. And I agree with POC. I think that people just need something to connect to. I think most people want to do the right thing. They want to do good things. They just might need a little help figuring out how to jump in, how to connect. I think our block captains are super important. That there's a consistent leader that people can see. And I think if they see that over time, they'll join. But I also liked our earlier conversation about behaviors. We have to help people do the right thing according to how they're going to behave. So putting trash cans where people are. I would love to see us come up with more sites where contractors can manage their waste appropriately, since that's probably the biggest illegal dumping source. I would love for us to figure out how to help folks who want to have auto repair shops, how to do that in a way that is clean for the community and as opposed to detracting from quality of life. I think that we can give people opportunities to do the right thing if we think about, behavior.
All right. We got just a few minutes left here. I see a question from Lachelle. How do you how do you think community voices, especially in neighborhoods that feel ignored, use media, organizing, or data to force environmental action when systems move too slowly?
Jared, will you read that again?
All right. I think the idea is how can communities, especially those that feel ignored, use media or organizing or data to force action when systems move too slowly? Any advice for folks that are trying to change the system, but it's not moving fast enough?
They just need to join Trash Academy and the Clean Philadelphia Now Coalition for sure. That's what we do. Yeah, so we push, right?
I think the questions listed all of the ways that people can impact change, right? Organize, use social media, contact your council members. I would lift up Philly Thrive as an example. Philly Thrive has done an amazing job fighting for their community that for years was basically abused by the refinery, right? And people know how to get out and tell their story. People have been sending me all day with these videos that they've been doing about their streets not being plowed. Philadelphians know how to say what's bothering them. Get out there and do it.
And my advice would be, something what the councilwoman said, it's not necessarily waiting on the systems, being able to go out there and do it yourself, be the architect of the vision that you have. So when it comes down to the environmental action that you're looking for, go out and write your own petition, get as many names as you can so we can say, yo, we want to turn this vacant lot into a garden. If that system is moving too slow, you get on your feet, you put your boots on, you lock in and say, community, this is what we need. If you sign up, we can make this happen. We can bring it to the councilwoman or the councilman. You know what I mean? I think that it comes down to the individual person ready to move forward and put themselves in a position of action.
I just want to dovetail on that with this one additional statement because I love how P.O.C. just brought up the individuals, but I think also, especially in 2026, and this past year in 2025, a lot of people, especially coming to our events for Green Philly, I think have felt hopeless and felt like things are hard. And I know, especially right now, what's happening federally, we all talked about examples. I know there's several others we could talk about. What's happening on a state level, you feel powerless as a person and individual at times. But I think finding those communities, and I think the beauty, and one thing that I like to say, because I think earlier, it's like, what stories aren't being told? It's like literally how there are so many expansive people taking action on their block, taking action for nonprofits, the businesses, the companies that are all collectively doing the work. So, like, find your lane and find your community because there are people probably in your neighborhood in Facebook groups. I think someone like there's times where you see someone like, I just want to go outside and clean up litter on my block, and people are like, I'll join you. So like no idea is too small. I was also thinking how the plastic bag ban, which I may have done for like, yeah, I don't know, 2012 for like 12 months or something. I think that took like 10 to 12 years
Yeah,
in several groups. I know
it's
Trash
still
Academy
happening.
people exactly helped get it across the line. But some of these efforts take years, some are instant wins, but I think knowing the long-term goal, I'll stop. But just I get so excited when it's like community thinking of like how to help each other. And really this is like what's gonna help us get through, hopefully, 2026 and onward with everything.
And then also, Julie, just to plug Green Philly, right? Green Philly actually has a network meetup where you can come and meet other volunteers who want to volunteer for things. You know what I mean? Like they literally have an event to say, hey, come meet up. If you want to be a volunteer, we have people out here who are looking for people who need volunteers. So that could be one event that you can start with.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Did I freeze? Okay. Thank you. This has been amazing. Even for me, I am, we all have our things, I will say. Sustainability, it's just, it's not something I lead into this intensive, and this conversation for me was so informative, and it really confirmed it's really okay.
Okay.
Wow. So that means I need to be quiet. Um, Great conversation. No, we do want to pivot, and April, you can bring up the post poll. So we do want to ask all of our participants if you have time to answer our closeout questions. And as we're asking you to answer those closeout questions, I would like to ask each panelist and our moderator to just give us one final thought as we transition out. So April, you can pull up that poll. And I'm gonna start with the moderator, and then I'm gonna ask Erica if you can call out everyone else to kind of give their final thought of the evening.
Yeah, sure. Briefly, I'll say that my introduction to economic justice was in 2016 at the Policy Link Equity Summit. It's when I really understood that this was a sector of activism and advocacy. And since then, I have been learning on my own time about what these issues do and how they impact communities that we live, we love, and we play in. And so I will just encourage everyone who may not be as similar to what Portia mentioned, that this may not be in your day to day as a topic, as a subject matter. Just figure out how it's impacting you. It's more than a movie, Aaron Brockovich. There's a lot of other things that are going on in our communities right here that impact us in the real and not in the fiction. With that, I will pass it to P.O.C.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you all again for sticking around and joining us here on this virtual conversation. We appreciate the solidarity and everyone who showed up. My last words for tonight is that the conversation for me particularly doesn't stop tonight here on Zoom. You can hear me every Friday on WRD. Our environmental justice show is called Eco Word. It starts at 10 a.m. on 96.1 FM, and you can always hear it live on wordradio.com. And then another thing that I just want to leave as far as comments is that when it comes down to this environmental justice fight, when it comes down to the sustainability fight in the industry that we're in right now, it is something that is a long-term fight. You know, we're going to be fighting for the next generation and trying to keep the planet warm and cool for the next generation. So it's going to be something that we have to continue to stay in the fight. And I just encourage everyone to not give up. And we only got 3 more years with this one. Well, 2.5 years with 47, and we're going to be back on schedule, guys.
Oh, hallelujah. Shari.
Yeah,
Sorry, can
thanks.
you?
I really appreciated this panel. It's exciting to see the energy and the intensity and the commitment. And that's what we find with environmental justice is that people, the leadership stays longer, people stay in it forever because it's a very, very loving and supportive community. And we always put humor and creativity first and connection, relationship. And I even saw that in this group tonight. So thank you. And I just invite everyone into the space of our own relationships here in Philly, which are so positive and so amazing.
Thank you. Julie?
Thank you again for hosting this conversation. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. I learned so much and got very excited. I think just once again, going back to community and thinking of how, I think one also taking a break from phones, technology, as much as we're on screens at times is necessary, especially this day and age. But also just thinking of how you can help your neighborhood, start with your block. It doesn't have to be huge changes. And I think also at Green Philly, thanks P.O.C. for that shout out too. We tried gathering people in person and just getting out there and meeting people who care about issues too. It's such an important reminder when we're all on our phones, social media, scrolling hopelessly and endlessly. So yeah, hope everyone, takes some small actions and looking forward to this conversation evolving and continuing.
Awesome. Zoraida?
I would just like to say to one, empower the local businesses to connect with your local grassroots nonprofits like Love Thy Hood or organizations like Glitter doing the work or council members who are doing this work to be able to understand that you have the power to create change within your neighborhoods. And I also want to encourage people to understand that they're not alone. We're not alone in this. This affects all of us. Reinventing the wheel probably isn't the best approach. Obviously, we have to challenge certain things, but understand that there are people in your community that are the OGs of the community and have historical context. Lean on them to see what they've worked on and work from there and build community. So that would be my last thought. Thank you so much for having me. This has been an honor and a pleasure, by the way, to hear from all these wonderful women. And I just feel empowered, and I hope this empowers and inspires other communities as well.
Thank you. And Councilmember Gauthier, you will have the last word.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining the webinar. Thank you for having me. I think we have to, as a city, focus on environmental justice and sustainability because it's core to our very existence. I love that this webinar was so focused on citizen engagement and organizing. I'm a part of government because I believe in the power of government to make positive change. However, government doesn't function well without being pushed by the people who live here. We hear from moneyed interests every single day. We need to hear from regular, everyday working class people about what you want to see from us in your communities. That's how we get stronger as a city.
Thank you so much. And as we close, yes, that is our charge to everyone. First of all, stay connected to Every Voice, Every Vote. The name of the initiative is that for a reason. Your votes matter, but most importantly, your voices. And voting is just a small part of your voice. So we want to encourage you, take civic action in support of sustainability, economic justice. I love the pivot of that language. And share with us how you showed up. Tag us so we can amplify you on our socials, on our Instagram, Voice Vote Philly, Facebook, Threads, and LinkedIn. And also, there were several options shared with you how you can civically engage. Call 311. I heard that loud and clear. I think tonight what was affirmed for me is the things that we think are mundane and don't matter, they do matter. They're data points. They inform and they push. Um, get involved with any of the organizations represented here, right? There are so many great leaders here. Tune in to P.O.C.'s radio channel. We want to provide you with the information to make sure you are connected to opportunities to be civically engaged. Shari and Zoraida and Sustainability Business Network, Julie, Green Philly. I am just really, really excited and thankful for this panel. This will be shared with everyone because it was recorded. And yes, there will be a part two of this conversation in April. Please save the date. Also, please save the date for our next community conversation, which will focus on public safety. It's February 27th, I believe. And again, we will receive it. Everyone will receive a follow-up email with those details. It is 7:38. We're at 8 minutes over our time. So I would like to close. Thank you so much again, everyone. Stay warm, be safe, and until next time.
Bye. Thank you.
Peace. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.
You.